All right, so I finally got to see the debate between Billy Carson and Wes Huff. And you know what? I didn't think Billy did that bad. Seriously, hear me out. Yes, he got fact-checked a few times, and yes, some of his points didn't hold up under scrutiny. But during the debate itself, he actually handled things relatively calmly. The problem isn't his performance, it's what happened afterward. Billy probably thought he bombed harder than he actually did, and in his panic, he overreacted. Showing up at the producer's house in the middle of the night, trying to suppress the video, that's the kind of overreaction that makes everything worse. If he just let the debate stand as it was, people might have moved on. But instead, it spiraled into this huge controversy, and now it's all anyone can talk about. That being said, let's move past the drama and talk about what really caught my attention during the debate. There were some fascinating points brought up, and one of them was Billy's mention of the Dogon tribe in Mali. He said the Dogon have knowledge of the stars that they shouldn't have, knowledge that even modern science didn't confirm until relatively recently. Now, here's where it gets even more intriguing. Billy said that this knowledge is passed down through generations, but only to one person at a time. And that person, they're not allowed to be touched. No one can lay a hand on them. Why? Well, that's where I start asking questions. What do scientifically advanced aliens, if that's the origin of this knowledge, care about someone being touched? Where's the logic in that? To me, this sounds less like science and more like something deeply spiritual. Think about how in the Bible, when the woman with the issue of blood touched Jesus, he said he felt power leave him. There's something profound about the concept of touch and the transfer of energy or spirit. So if someone touched this knowledge bearer in the Dogon tribe, what might be transferred? Could it be something so dangerous or evil that it needed to be contained? Maybe that's why the tribe decided, let's not even risk it. Don't touch them. It feels like they're dealing with forces that are beyond human understanding, forces that aren't just physical, but spiritual. And this brings me to another point about alien encounters. How telepathy is often reported in these encounters, but an alien species, supposedly from a completely different biological system, connect to the human mind so seamlessly. It doesn't make sense unless there's some kind of shared operating system. And by that, I mean a shared spiritual origin. Billy Carson on the Old Testament. So during the debate, both Billy Carson and the moderator Mitt expressed their issues with how God conducted things in the Old Testament. They felt he was overly harsh. The laws, the wars, the killings, it all seemed too mean and punitive for them. And honestly, I think their frustration stems from a misunderstanding of the big picture. To really understand this, you've got to look at where we came from. When God created humanity, he didn't just want beings to rule over. He wanted a relationship and experience to share. But what did we do? We betrayed that trust. Adam and Eve ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, essentially saying, no, we want to go at this on our own. We decided we wanted to define good and evil for ourselves. God didn't force us. It was an act of rebellion. And because God is pure and perfect, sin created a separation. He couldn't stay merged with us in that state without corrupting the very fabric of creation. Let me put it this way. Imagine the source code of reality, God himself, being infected with a virus. The consequences would have been catastrophic. Instead, God withdrew his presence to preserve us in creation. And look at what we've done with that freedom. War, hatred, suffering, environmental destruction. Every choice, whether individual, communal, or national, has contributed to the brokenness of this world. But here's the thing. The world still belongs to God, his creation, his rules. If he was going to let us live in this world with free will, there had to be laws to protect us from ourselves and to point us back to him. Those Old Testament laws may seem harsh, but they were necessary to establish order and show us one undeniable truth. We can't do this on our own. Time and time again, humanity failed to live up to God's standards. And that was the point. Our inability to save ourselves was always meant to drive us back to him. Now, this is where God's love comes into play. The penalty for sin was death, not because he wanted it that way, but because that's the natural consequence of turning away from the source of life. Yet, instead of leaving us in the pit we dug, he stepped into his creation. God became man, Jesus Christ, and took the penalty on himself. Through his death, he bridged the gap we created, offering us his spirit to live within us again if we believe. So yes, the Old Testament can feel intense, but when you zoom out, it's a story of love, justice, and redemption. It's not about a mean God. It's about a God who is holy, patient, and willing to do whatever it takes to bring us back to him. Now, during the debate, the moderator brought up a classic argument. How can David, who committed terrible acts like sleeping with someone else's wife and then orchestrating her husband's murder, be called a man after God's own heart? And honestly, I get why this confuses people. But here's the thing. You have to look deeper to understand what this means. First off, let me say this loud and clear. There is no perfect man. Not then, not now. And David is the perfect example of that. He was filled with the Holy Spirit, chosen by God, and yet he was fallible. He fell into sin just like every single one of us does. But here's the difference. David's heart posture. Despite his failures, he genuinely sought to please God and understood how to return to him in humility. And here's what I find fascinating about David. He had this childlike way of relating to God. Honestly, it's like he knew how to get to God's heart the way a kid knows how to tug on their parents' emotions. Let me give you an example. When David was running from his own son, Absalom, imagine the heartbreak of being betrayed by your own child. There was this man mocking him as he fled. He was throwing insults, saying all kinds of nasty things. Now, David's warriors, his fighters, were ready to silence this man permanently. They asked David, "Why don't you let us deal with him?" But what did David do? He said, "No, let him keep mocking me. Maybe God will see this, take pity on me, and bless me instead." Do you hear the depth of that? David was willing to endure humiliation, not out of weakness, but out of a belief that his humility would draw God's favor. That's someone who truly understands how to connect with God. And let's not forget another defining moment, when the Ark of the Covenant was brought to Jerusalem. David didn't care about looking like a dignified king. He stripped down to simple clothes and danced before the Lord with all his might, humbling himself in front of his people. His own wife, Michal, mocked him for it. But David didn't care. His joy and reverence for God outweighed his concern for appearances. These are the kinds of things that made David a man after God's own heart. Not his perfection, but his relentless desire to honor and reconnect with God, even after he sinned. And yes, David messed up big time. But when confronted, he didn't justify or downplay his actions. Instead, he owned up to them, repented deeply, and sought God's forgiveness. Psalm 51, where David cries out, "Create in me a clean heart, O God," is a testament to his understanding of God's mercy and holiness. So for those who see David's title as some kind of contradiction, I'd say this: it's not about what David did. It's about how he responded to his failures and how he continually sought God with humility, faith, and an open heart. That's the difference. To wrap this up, I want to speak directly to Billy Carson. Billy, if you ever see this, let me just say, relax. Honestly, the debate wasn't that bad. Yes, you were fact-checked, and yes, you were challenged, but that's what debates are for. The problem isn't the debate itself. It's how you reacted afterward. Showing up at a producer's house and trying to suppress the video, that's where things really started to go downhill. But let's move past that, because here's what I hope for you. I hope your pursuit of truth remains genuine. It's easy when you've gained a following and people start associating you with a specific narrative for ego to creep in. And when that happens, even if you come across undeniable truth, admitting it can feel impossible. Instead, you're tempted to double down on the lie because that's what rewards you. But Billy, if you're truly seeking truth, don't let your ego get in the way. If God ever allows you to see and understand the bigger picture, I hope you'll have the humility and courage to share what you've learned, even if it means walking back on some of your earlier claims. Because in the end, it's not about being right or wrong in the moment. It's about what you do with the truth when you find it. Will you cling to your pride, or will you let the truth set you free? That's my hope for you, Billy, that your journey leads you to truth and that you're brave enough to follow it wherever it takes you. And with that, I'll leave it there.